They say ghosts only haunt old, abandoned houses. But in my neighborhood, the haunting didn't start until Karen got involved. HOA Karen, clipboard queen, suburban dictator, beige paint enthusiast. The woman had fined me for everything. Grass length, mailbox height, even the shade of my curtains. But the day she discovered a ghost lived with me, oh, she nearly combusted on the spot. She stood on my porch, shrieking, "You can't have unapproved residents, not even dead ones." And when I laughed in her face, she stormed away, vowing to get my ghost removed. What she didn't know was that ghosts don't like being threatened, especially mine. And from that day forward, my ghost decided to give her the kind of attention no neighbor could survive. Karen tried to evict my ghost. Now it pays her daily visits. The first time Karen saw the ghost, she thought it was me playing tricks on her. It was a Tuesday evening, around 7 p.m., the witching hour for HOA Karen to patrol the neighborhood with flashlights like suburban security guards. I was in my living room, sipping stale coffee and watching reruns, when I heard the first shriek. It wasn't the usual Karen shriek, the kind she used when she caught kids chalking hopscotch on the sidewalk. This one had terror in it, sharp enough to rattle windows. I ran outside, mug in hand, only to find Karen standing in front of my yard, pointing her finger like she'd seen Satan himself. "There!" she screamed. "There was a man in your upstairs window. I saw him staring at me." I squinted. "Karen, I live alone." She jabbed her finger harder. "Don't you dare lie. I know what I saw. A tall man, pale as death, just staring down at me with those glowing eyes." And that was my first mistake. I laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite giggle. I laughed hard, nearly spilling coffee all over myself, because I knew exactly who she had seen. "Oh, you mean Gerald?" I asked. "Gerald?" Her voice cracked like she'd swallowed gravel. "Yeah," I said casually. "My ghost." Karen's face turned colors that aren't found in nature. You have a ghost? In this neighborhood? That violates at least 12 bylaws." Now, let me pause here to tell you a little about Gerald. He wasn't your typical horror movie gal. No dripping blood, no crawling out of TVs. Gerald was eccentric. He liked to hum Frank Sinatra at midnight. He rearranged my furniture whenever he got bored. And yes, occasionally he liked to photobomb Karen's nightly patrols by peeking out of my windows like a Victorian widower. I didn't mind him. Honestly, he was better company than most people. But Karen, she declared war that very night. The next morning, I woke to find a bright yellow violation notice stuck to my front door. Unapproved resident on premises. Must remove ghost within 14 days or face fines. 14 days. To evict someone who had already been dead for a century. I walked straight to her house, violation in hand. She answered the door in her robe, hair in curlers, looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. "Yes," she snapped. "Karen," I said, holding the paper up, "I don't think the bylaws cover supernatural tenants." "They cover everything," she screeched. "Section 8, subsection C, no non-family members may reside on property without prior approval." "He's not exactly a family member," I said, "more like a roommate who doesn't pay rent." She gasped like I confessed a murder. "Then is trespassing. And as HOA president, I order you to remove him immediately." Behind me, the air went cold. I didn't even need to look. I knew Gerald was listening. And judging by the way Karen's eyes bugged out, he'd chosen that moment to make himself visible. I swear, she leapt 3 feet in the air, clutching her robe. His right there, his looking at me, his smiling. Gerald did have a wicked grin. I'll give him that. Karen slammed the door in my face so hard the wreath fell off. That was the day the real fun began. The first incident happened at her book club. Karen loved hosting her gaggle of beige-wearing friend to gossip about whose lawn wasn't trimmed. This time, Gerald decided to attend. No one saw him at first. He was subtle, sitting in a corner chair, just humming his Sinatra tunes under his breath. But then he started flipping through Karen's magazines. Pages turned on their own. Teacups rattled. One of her friends fainted dead away when the chandelier swung violently without warning. Karen called the police. They found nothing. The second incident was worse. She was in the middle of giving a lecture about mailbox heights to a new neighbor when Gerald whispered in her ear, "Boo." Just one word, but enough to send her running down the street like she'd seen the apocalypse. By the third incident, Karen was convinced I was orchestrating it. She marched to my house with 2 other HOA board members in tow, accusing me of weaponizing paranormal forces. I told them flat out, "Look, Gerald does what he wants. I don't control him." The board members chuckled nervously, clearly not believing in ghosts, until Gerald appeared behind Karen, crossed his arms, and mimicked every angry gesture she made. When she stumped her foot, he stumped his. When she waved her clipboard, he waved an invisible one. The board members screamed louder than she did. That night, I heard her shouting in her backyard, "You can't evict me. You hear me? I'll evict you first." Gerald must have heard too, because that's when he got creative. Every night after, he started visiting her. Not just haunting, visiting. He'd sit at the end of her bed, humming Sinatra. He'd rearrange her living room furniture just enough that she stubbed her toes in the morning. He even started writing messages in the steam of a bathroom mirror. HOA Karen. She filed complaints. She called priests. She even tried spraying holy water all over her house. Gerald laughed so hard he shorted out her lights. The climax of Chapter 1? The lawsuit. Oh! She really did it. She filed an actual lawsuit against me for ghost trespassing. The document claimed I had failed to contain and restrain paranormal entities emanating from my property, causing her psychological distress and damages to quality of life. I nearly choked reading it. But Gerald, he was delighted. That night, for the first time ever, he whispered in my ear, "Let's have some fun with this." And that's when I realized Karen thought she was fighting me. But really, she declared war on Gerald. And Gerald was only just getting started. The day of the first court hearing felt unreal. I mean, how do you even prepare for a lawsuit about ghosts? I sat in my kitchen that morning, drinking burnt coffee, staring at the stack of paperwork Karen's lawyer had shoved into my mailbox. Failure to contain ectoplasmic activity. Negligence of paranormal supervision. Illegal subletting to an unregistered spiritual entity. It read less like a lawsuit and more like a Halloween special of Judge Judy. But Karen was dead serious. I could see her through the blinds that morning, strutting around her driveway in a navy blue pantsuit that screamed, "I'm here to ruin your life." She barked at her husband to load boxes of evidence into the trunk, grainy photographs of floating objects, a chip mug that Gerald had knocked off her table, and a stack of voice recordings that sounded like someone whispering boo through a fan. I didn't hire a lawyer. Honestly, I couldn't afford one. And besides, who in their right mind would want to argue a case about ghosts? My plan was simple. Show up, explain to the judge that I had zero control over Gerald, and let the absurdity of it all sink in. Surely no sane court would entertain this nonsense. But then again, I had underestimated 2 things: the sheer determination of HOA Karen and Gerald's wicked sense of humor. By noon, the small claimed court downtown was packed. Karen had dragged half the HOA with her for moral support, each one armed with their own stories of suspicious activity. Lights flickering, cold drafts, the sound of someone humming Sinatra in their basements. Apparently, Gerald had been visiting more people than I thought. Karen's lawyer was a wiry man with glasses who looked like he hadn't smiled since birth. He shuffled papers like he was preparing to try the O.J. trial all over again. When the judge finally entered, the room fell silent, and I swear, the temperature dropped by 10 degrees. That was my first clue that Gerald had decided to attend. Karen wasted no time. She jumped up, pointing a finger at me as if she were unveiling a criminal. "Your Honor, this man has willfully unleashed a hostile entity into our neighborhood, violating HOA standards and causing emotional harm to myself and others." The judge rubbed his temples. "Mrs. Peterson, you are claiming, what exactly? That your neighbor is responsible for a ghost?" "Yes," she shrieked. "A ghost named Gerald. He trespasses nightly. He vandalizes my home. He—" At that exact moment, the lights above us flickered. Papers rustled. A low hum of "Fly Me to the Moon" drifted through the air vents. The courtroom gasped. Karen froze mid-sentence, her face pale. She whipped her head around, clutching her pearls. You see? You see. He's here right now. The judge leaned forward. Is someone humming? I didn't even bother to hide my smirk. That would be Gerald. Karen shrieked. Make him stop. The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court. Order. But Gerald wasn't done. The humming grew louder. The ceiling fan above her spun wildly. And then, just as Karen tried to collect herself, the stack of evidence boxes she brought with her tipped over on their own, spilling papers across the floor. Karen's lawyer scrambled to pick them up, stammering, technical difficulties, Your Honor. The judge pinched the bridge of his nose. Mr. Lewis, he said, turning to me, is this entity under your control? I shook my head. With all due respect, sir, Gerald doesn't take orders from anyone. He's been here longer than most of us, and if Karen has a problem with him, she should probably take it up with the afterlife. Snickers broke out in the gallery. Even the bailiff coughed into his fist to hide a laugh. Karen slammed her fist against the table. This is no laughing matter. That thing has ruined my life. Gerald must have taken offense to that, because right then, the courtroom doors swung open with a deafening bang. Everyone jumped. A cold wind whipped through the room, scattering Karen's papers like confetti. And there, in the doorway, faint but visible to all, was Gerald. He looked dapper, actually. Tall, pale, dressed in a suit that shimmered like smoke. He tipped an invisible hat to the judge, then sauntered, yes, sauntered, into the courtroom like he owned the place. Someone screamed. A woman fainted. The bailiff dropped his notepad. Karen pointed, shrieking incoherently. There! That's him. That's a monster. Gerald ignored her. He walked right up to the witness stand, leaned casually against it, and started mimicking Karen's wild gestures. When she stomped her foot, he stomped his. When she waved her arms, he flailed as like a cartoon. The entire courtroom burst into nervous laughter. The judge pounded his gavel, his face pale as paper. Mr. Lewis, do you understand what's happening here? I shrugged. I told you, Your Honor, Gerald does what he wants. Karen tried to regain control. She jabbed her finger at me. This man has to be held accountable. If you don't punish him, then what kind of society are we living in? The judge sighed deeply. Mrs. Peterson, I will take your complaint under advisement. But in the meantime, I strongly suggest you seek spiritual counsel. Gerald grinned wide, bowed theatrically, and vanished into thin air. The case was adjourned. But that was only the beginning, because Karen wasn't satisfied with court. If anything, the failed spectacle only fueled her rage. That night, she called an emergency HOA meeting in her backyard, complete with a podium and a microphone she clearly bought off Amazon just to sound official. I watched from my porch as she ranted to a small crowd of terrified neighbors about taking our neighborhood back from the undead menace. She proposed new bylaws banning paranormal entities, mandatory exorcism for all homes, and even ghost detection inspections every 3 months. Gerald, of course, attended. He stood behind her, invisible to most but not to me, making faces and twirling her hair until she swatted at the air like she was fighting bees. By the end of her speech, half the HOA members had quietly slipped away, too spooked to listen further. Karen was losing her grip. And Gerald? He was just getting warmed up. That night, he whispered in my ear again, She thinks she can fight me. Let's see how she handles a daily visit. I didn't know what he meant at the time, but the very next morning, Karen was screaming again. This time, because she woke up to find the words HI Karen written in front across a bathroom mirror and a perfectly made cup of coffee waiting for her on the counter. It wasn't just haunting anymore. It was personal, and Gerald never lost a personal fight. Karen thought she had survived court. She thought filing a lawsuit would scare me and my ghost into submission. But Gerald doesn't forgive, and he never forgets. If she wanted war, he was ready to fight it, not once, not twice, but every single day. Karen wanted my ghost gone. Instead, she got herself a permanent house guest. And trust me, Gerald was about to redefine what daily visits really meant. The first of Gerald's daily visits started with something small. Karen woke up one morning to find a kitchen chair stacked neatly on top of her dining table, legs pointing to the ceiling like a bizarre art exhibit. She screamed so loud I heard it from across the street. By the time she dragged her husband in to witness the chaos, the chairs had quietly returned to their proper places. Her husband rolled his eyes and accused her of dreaming again. Gerald loved it. That night, he appeared at the foot of my bed, his smoky form glowing faintly in the dark. "She doesn't believe her own eyes," he whispered. "Let's make sure no one else can deny it either." And so the campaign began. The next day, Karen's sprinklers turned on by themselves, except instead of watering the lawn, they followed her like heat-seeking missiles as she tried to grab her mail. Neighbors watched from their porches as she ran in circles, shrieking, "Make it stop! He's doing it again." But when one neighbor approached to help, the sprinklers shut off instantly, leaving Karen dripping wet and furious. On day 3, every picture frame in her house turned crooked. Perfectly crooked. The moment she straightened one, another would tilt. For hours, she ran around adjusting them until she collapsed in exhaustion, surrounded by mocking diagonals. By day 5, Gerald had escalated. She woke up to find a television already on, playing black and white static at full volume. Across the screen, glowing letters appeared as if written by an invisible hand. "Good morning, Karen." She screamed so loud she called 911. The police arrived, checked the place, and told her to lay off the horror movies. And that only made her angrier. The HOA meetings became more frantic. She stood before her dwindling audience, eyes bloodshot, hair a mess, waving her clipboard like a sword. "He visits me every day. Every single day," she yelled. "We have to take action, or we'll all be next." Half the neighbors avoided her now, convinced she'd lost her mind. The other half whispered nervously about the strange things they'd started to experience themselves. Cold drafts, flickering lights, the faint sound of Sinatra humming when no one was home. Gerald wasn't just visiting Karen anymore. He was spreading his presence across the entire neighborhood like a storm cloud. But his favorite target was still Karen. One evening, I watched from my porch as Karen tried to relax on her back patio with a glass of wine. Gerald appeared behind her, invisible to most, but not to me. He plucked the wine glass from her hand, floated it gently into the air, and dumped the contents over her perfectly coiffed hair. Karen shrieked, leapt out of her chair, and threw the empty glass at the bushies. Her husband came running. "What the hell happened?" "The ghost! The ghost poured wine on me." But all he saw was his wife dripping mellow and pointing at empty air. That night, Gerald whispered to me again, "She's cracking." And he wasn't wrong. By the end of the week, Karen looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under her eyes, hair frazzled, her once perfect suburban composure shattered. She started patrolling the neighborhood not with her usual clipboard, but with a Bible in one hand and a spray bottle of holy water in the other. Kids rode their bikes behind her, chanting Ghostbuster Karen, until their parents dragged them inside. But Gerald wasn't done. He wanted to break her completely. On day 10, she woke to find her entire lawn covered in words spelled out with garden mulch. "Hello again." She shrieked, called her landscaper, and demanded he clean it up immediately. The next morning, the message had changed. "Missed you." By day 12, Gerald started singing. Not humming, not whispering, singing. Frank Sinatra, full volume, echoing through her house at 3 in the morning. She ran through every room, unplugging radios, smashing speakers, even tearing the batteries out of her smoke alarms. Still, the voice crooned, "I've got you under my skin." That was the night Karen finally snapped. At 4 a.m., she stormed across the street to my house, pounding on my door until I opened it. She looked wild, barefoot, hair tangled, bathrobe clinging to her shoulders. "Make him stop," she screamed. "I can't take it anymore. I'll pay you. I'll do anything. Just get him out of my house." Behind her, Gerald materialized, grinning like a devil. He tipped his smoky hat to me, then leaned close to her ear. She froze as his voice slithered into her mind. "See you tomorrow, Karen." She shrieked and bolted back into the night. The neighborhood was buzzing by morning. Rumors flew that Karen had gone insane, that she was seeing things, that the pressure of running the HOA had finally broken her. But I knew the truth. Gerald was winning, and for the first time in years, I felt free. because the neighborhood dictator who once fined me for lawn height and curtain color was now too busy battling a ghost to bother anyone else. But Gerald wasn't satisfied with silence. He had bigger plans. He told me that night, in a whisper colder than winter, "We're just getting started." And deep down, I knew he meant it. By the time Gerald's daily visits entered their third week, Karen was unraveling faster than cheap wallpaper. Her neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. Her friends stopped answering her calls. Even her husband, the poor guy, had started sleeping in the guest room just to escape the nightly screaming fits. But Gerald wasn't satisfied with breaking her behind closed doors. No, he wanted the whole world to watch. The first public incident happened at an HOA meeting. Karen, still clinging to her title as president like it was the last lifeboat on the Titanic, had gathered the remaining faithful in her backyard. Only 5 people showed up, and 3 of them were just there for the free lemonade. She stood at the podium, hair frizzed, eyes twitching, launching into another rant about community values when Gerald arrived. I saw him before anyone else. He appeared behind her, flickering faintly like a candle flame. His grin stretched ear to ear. He tipped his ghostly hat at me, then turned to the crowd. And that's when the microphone on the podium crackled. Karen tapped it, annoyed. "Stupid thing." Then, in a low, velvety voice, the microphone carried Gerald's words. "Good evening, Karen." The crowd gasped. Karen froze. "Who said that?" The MIC hissed again, louder this time. "You wanted me gone. But I like it here." Karen shrieked, dropped her clipboard, and bolted. The 5 attendees scattered like pigeons, leaving the podium rocking in the breeze. By the next morning, word had spread across the neighborhood like wildfire. The ghost had spoken. Karen tried to do damage control. She printed flyers declaring a ghost safety initiative and shoved them in every mailbox. She went door to door, begging people not to believe the rumors. But Gerald was relentless. Wherever she went, he followed. At the grocery store, she reached for a carton of eggs only for them to lift off the shelf and hover out of reach. She jumped, swatted at the air, until the carton exploded in her hands, yolk dripping down her blouse. Other shoppers stared as she shrieked, "His here? His here right now." Security had to escort her out. At the salon, just as her stylist snipped the first lock of hair, Gerald whooshed by in a cold gust, making every pair of scissors in the shop snap shut at once. Women screamed. Blow dryers shorted out. Karen stumbled out with half a haircut and mascara running down her cheeks. But the pièce de résistance came on Sunday morning. Karen was a devout churchgoer, the kind who sat in the front pew and made loud amens to prove her piety. That week, she marched into church wearing her best hat, determined to reclaim some shred of dignity. I almost stayed home, but something told me Gerald wouldn't miss this opportunity. And sure enough, as the pastor began his sermon, I felt the temperature dip. Karen was sitting stiffly, Bible clutched in white knuckles, when the hymnals in the pew behind her flew open all at once. Pages fluttered, flipping rapidly like a deck of cards. The organ blared a single haunting note on its own. The pastor froze mid-sentence. Then, clear as day, Gerald's voice echoed through the church. "Peace be with you, Karen." The congregation erupted into chaos. Some screamed, some prayed, some bolted for the exits. Karen leapt to her feet, pointing wildly. "Is he? He's following me." And then the stained glass window above the altar rattled violently, light bending and shimmering in the colors. For a moment, Gerald's smoky form appeared in the glass, grinning down at her. Karen fainted right there in the aisle. They carried her out, limp as a rag doll, while whispers spread like wildfire. By the next morning, half the town knew about the church haunting. At this point, Karen's reputation was ruined. The queen of the HOA, once feared and obeyed, had become the neighborhood punchline. Kids wore bedsheets over their heads and shouted, "Bo-oh, Karen," as she passed. Teenagers blasted Sinatra outside her window at night, just to watch her scream. Even her own board members resigned, leaving her the sole commander of a sinking ship. But Gerald still wasn't finished. He told me one night, as I sat on my couch pretending to read while he rearranged my coffee mugs in mid-air. "She wanted to evict me," he whispered, "so I'm going to evict her." The next morning, Karen put her house up for sale. The sign went up before dawn, as if doing it quietly would erase the humiliation. She told neighbors she was downsizing and moving closer to her sister. But everyone knew the truth. Gerald had won. Or so I thought, because Karen wasn't the type to go quietly. She had one last move left. A week later, she showed up on my porch, disheveled but determined. "You think you've won," she hissed, eyes bloodshot. "But I've called in professionals. Ghost hunters. Real ones. They'll be here tomorrow. And when they are done, you and your little phantom freak will be history." She spun on her heel and stormed off before I could answer. Gerald appeared beside me, translucent arms crossed, wearing his usual mischievous grin. "Ghost hunters," he mused. "How quaint." And then he laughed. A long, chilling laugh that echoed through the night, rattling every window on the street. That was when I realized something terrifying. Gerald wasn't afraid of being exorcised. He was excited. And whatever he had planned for Karen's ghost hunters was going to make everything so far look like child's play. The lawsuit dragged on for weeks, but the real circus wasn't inside the courtroom. It was inside Karen's house. Every night, the ghost got bolder. First it was whispers and flickering lights, then slammed doors, flying dishes, and even HOA paperwork shredded midair like a paper shredder from hell. Karen was losing it. Her once perfect lawn now looked like a graveyard carnival. The ghost carved circles into her grass. HOA flags she hung proudly were torn down by invisible hands and replaced with bedsheets painted with the words "Karen must fall." The neighbors started charging money to watch the nightly hauntings like it was Netflix in real life. Families would bring lawn chairs, popcorn, even soda coolers, and sit across the street just to see Karen scream into the void. The irony? HOA rules said she couldn't have more than 5 guests at a time, yet her property hosted hundreds of gawking spectators every night. Karen tried to find me again, demanding $10,000 for ghost harassment. I sent her back her own complaint, edited in red ink like a teacher grading homework, with a note, "Try harder. Ghost says hi." By this point, she wasn't just unraveling, she was detonating. The courtroom had become a stage where Karen shrieked about my neighbor weaponizing the supernatural while judges, lawyers, and even the stenographer tried not to laugh. At one hearing, she brought a ghost expert who turned out to be a guy in a Scooby-Doo t-shirt holding a plastic EMF detector he bought off eBay. The ghost humiliated him by ripping his toupee clean off and slapping it onto Karen's lawyer's face. But the finale was coming. One night, as the neighborhood gathered for another haunting spectacle, the ghost turned the dial to full chaos. Every light in Karen's house glowed red. Smoke rolled out of her chimney, though her fireplace wasn't lit. Her beloved garden gnomes, once neatly arranged in HOA-approved formation, marched on their own across the lawn like a tiny plastic army, chanting in squeaky voices, "Down with Karen! Down with HOA!" Karen bolted outside, still in her pink power suit, hair frizzed from stress. "This is your fault," she screamed at me across the street, voice cracking like a bad karaoke track. "You sent this demon." I raised my soda in salute and said, "Careful, Karen, he doesn't like being called names." That's when it happened. The ghost manifested, not as some shadowy blur, but in full, terrifying glory, a translucent figure in chains, glowing with eerie light, floating 10 feet above her driveway. Its voice shook windows and rattled car alarms. "Karen, your HOA is cursed." The crowd gasped, phones recording everything. Karen, in her most Karen moment yet, actually tried to hand the ghost a violation notice. "You can't float here without HOA approval," she shrieked. The ghost laughed, the kind of laugh that made everyone's skin crawl. Then, with one sweep of its spectral hand, it lifted every single HOA rulebook into the air, ripped them to shreds, and let the confetti rain down like cursed snow. The neighbors erupted in cheers. Some hugged, some cried, some danced on the shredded pages. For the first time in years, everyone felt free. Karen, however, collapsed in the street, wailing about justice and property values. The ghost leaned down, inches from her face, and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "You find the wrong man." From that night on, the HOA dissolved. People repainted their houses however they wanted. Lawns grew wild. Kids rode bikes at midnight. The neighborhood lived again. Karen, she moved out, muttering about lawsuits and exorcisms, her reign of terror over at last. And me? I didn't just win. I became a legend. The guy who sent a ghost to take down the most powerful HOA tyrant in town. Funny thing is, sometimes, late at night, I see that ghost sitting on my porch. Doesn't haunt me, doesn't speak, just sits, sipping a soda I leave out for him, like two old war buddies, enjoying the silence after victory.